The Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew.
Glory to you, Lord.
When John heard in prison what the Messiah was doing, he sent word by his disciples and said to him, "Are you the one who is to come, or are we to wait for another?" Jesus answered them, "Go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them. And blessed is anyone who takes no offense at me." As they went away, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John. "What did you go out into the wilderness to look at? A reed shaken by the wind? What then did you go out to see? Someone dressed in soft robes? Look, those who wear soft robes are in royal palaces. What then did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it is written, 'See, I am sending my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way before you.' Truly, I tell you, among those born of woman, no one has arisen greater than John the Baptist. Yet the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
You may be seated. Dear people of God, isn't it odd? Isn't the whole concept of John the Baptist odd? He was sent to be a messenger. He was sent ahead of the Lord. The Lord God sent this strange little man who wears camel hair and eats grasshoppers to do what? To prepare the way? Let me check. He was sent by the Lord God, the maker of heaven and earth, the Lord God, the creator of all things seen and all things unseen. Couldn't the Lord God have prepared the way for the Messiah all by himself? Why did he even bother to send a minion? You know, those little yellow things, to do his things. I will say this. John the Baptist, God's minion, the prophet, the messenger, is a sign of the supreme weirdness of God. By our standards, the mediated way that God has chosen to act in the world shows that God is a supreme weirdo. But it is not the way that God does things, to send us or to speak to us in an unmediated way. And by that I mean like he sends a go-between to prepare the way. He sends John the Baptist. In other words, he sends a preacher. And even of Jesus, our Christ, our Messiah, Jesus who is both God and a human being, God sends a messenger ahead of him, a preacher to put Jesus into the ears of people. The holes in your head were created for the express purpose that God would pack them full with his spoken word. God's insistence on sending a messenger is weird and strange because the world takes offense at it. The way God does things like that clashes with our greatest values as a society. Our values of self-determination, convenience, independence, our own self-importance, and any notion of the divine that originates from within ourselves. The gospel of Jesus Christ is offensive because when God approaches us, he does not take into consideration our will, our status, our circumstance, our preference, our own sense of how things should be. Instead, God does all the decision making. God does all the preparations. So God picks a person. God calls that person to a people, and then he distributes the gospel. Through a messenger, God gives people the goods. Surely Jesus is everywhere, but he is not everywhere with a promise. God puts the promise in a messenger who speaks the word. Hence we have John the Baptist preaching in the wilderness, preparing the way of the Lord. Hence we are here today because in one way or another there has been a person God has sent to us to put his word in us. Let us consider the circumstances of John the Baptist. At this point in Matthew chapter 11, he is in prison. Turns out political leaders don't like it when you tell them they shouldn't be in relations with their brother's wife. What we know about prisons in this time is that they were difficult places to be. John likely experienced many hardships, psychological distress, no access to the sun, cruelty from jailers, and the like. He would have needed to depend on his disciples to provide him with food. It is no wonder that John the Baptist begins to question things. He was to be the forerunner of the Messiah, and yet he was here stuck in prison. And while in the duress of prison, no longer perhaps in his right mind, John wonders if Jesus really is the Messiah after all. And he sends his disciples to Jesus and asks, "Are you the one who is to come, or are we to wait for another?" Jesus responds by sending him a messenger back to him. And it says, the messenger says, the blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them. We, sitting here today, maybe haven't been in prison. Maybe we have. Or maybe we know someone who is or was. If we haven't been in prison, there are probably times when we feel like we are. Maybe we have days that we feel trapped by the circumstances of our life. Or maybe our not as good friend, the devil, tells us that we are useless. Or maybe every day we carry a burden of shame on our shoulders. Whatever it is in the darkness that God's light shines most profoundly. We know John the Baptist's life does not end pleasantly. He will be in prison the rest of his life. He will have his head cut off and served on a platter to a deranged royal person. Yet, John did have one thing going for him. A promise from God. That Jesus is the Messiah. The preacher Jesus sent to him assured him, the blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them. The good news is always something brought to us. It is a divine power that comes from outside ourselves. And whatever the circumstances of our life, whether we are in prison all our lives, whether we have our head cut off, or no matter how dreadfully we may end up dying, we still have a promise that God brings before our ears through another person. God still speaks to you now in both his weird and beautiful way with his word. And his word is this: I am the good news for your bad situation. And I mean that for whatever your bad situation might be, for the sake of my only begotten Son, Jesus Christ, I forgive your sins. My life is your life. I will remember my holy promise that I made to you. And you will be raised from the dead, and I shall fill you with all good things.